Funding for The Audit, Black Women in Leadership, post-George Floyd, is brought to you in part by Grand Victoria Foundation and generous Chicagoans like you.
Grand Victoria Foundation believes in a future where racial justice isn't just an idea, it's reality, where Black communities across Illinois have the power, resources, and opportunities needed to thrive. We support the wisdom, leadership, and work of those most impacted by the systems we look to change, trusting their ability to build power and change narratives. When all communities have the resources and support they need, all Illinoisans can thrive, ensuring equity in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is collective liberation. This is the work of Grand Victoria Foundation.
I'm Tracy D. Hall, and this is The Audit, Chapter One, Tragedy Creates Opportunity. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police, a murder documented by the cell phones of shocked bystanders and replayed incessantly by the national and international media, companies and organizations desperate to demonstrate their commitment to racial justice and racial healing to a global public demanding accountability seem to jump at the opportunity to place Black women leaders into executive level positions, often for the first time, and as some would argue, without an actual plan or real commitment to support their success in these roles. The results, unsurprisingly, reflected this lack of forethought and ultimately placed the responsibility for success or failure on the shoulders of the new Black female leaders called in to fix old systemic problems.
Chinese health authorities are still working to identify the virus behind a pneumonia outbreak in the central city of Wuhan.
At least 59 people are believed to have been sickened by the new virus.
Afternoon news conference, President Trump provided an update on the coronavirus after the first reported U.S. death of a person in the Seattle area.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
I think if we go back to 2020, I think we can remember kind of the time period, right? Pandemic had hit. Country itself, I think, was scared about the future, not knowing what was going to happen. People were locked in their homes.
So when I go back to 2020, I think about how each of us were really frightened during that time. Everyone globally was very frightened. And we knew that there was no cure. If you could afford to not leave your house, you weren't going to leave your house. And so I actually think it's only because of that. It's only because we slowed down enough to pay attention that we all watched this video of George Floyd.
Police here now firing tear gas into the crowd. They are trying to push these folks back.
It should have been solved 50, 60 years ago.
For a brief moment in 2020, much of corporate America united around a common goal: to address the stark racial imbalances in their workplaces. George Floyd's death triggered widespread protests, which resulted in a rush of corporate pledges, primarily to hire, promote, and engage more Black individuals.
Honestly, there's so many names before George Floyd. There's so many incidences of this happening, but it's because we were so aware of our own mortality. And when we watched that it was a clear violation of this man who said he couldn't breathe and another man sitting on his neck, we watched a modern day lynching happen, that it created a emotive reaction. And I believe that emotive reaction was genuine, that people really were aghast and wanted to leverage what they understood about equity being different, that it wasn't gestural. It wasn't, hey, let's include one person that's different. Or, hey, let's try to have trainings about how to not say the thing that might hurt somebody's feelings. But it went to like, what does ownership mean? What does agency mean?
We had seen, the slaying of Trayvon Martin. We had seen the experiences with Breonna Taylor. This was not the first time, people tried to get things to listen. I mean, if you think about Black Lives Matter, that started in 2014. That was ground zero for Black Lives Matter. It wasn't 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. So it had been 6 years that the Black community and other allies were trying to rally to get people to wake up. And I think the biggest deficit was corporate America, because no matter how many conversations you were having, the representation in organizations did not change.
I think we can't understand 2020 and George Floyd without realizing that the proliferation of media and our ability to both receive information is ubiquitous, but also to ignore information, right, is at an all-time high. So you can just not deal with things that aren't pleasant. So this perfect storm of the pandemic and being sheltered in place really, to me, is the key of the story, because people who have historically experienced police brutality, the government not having your back, sleight of hand constantly with access to things and then it being removed, were not surprised. They were shocked at the level of brazenness of the officer to be staring down the young lady that was videotaping this incident, right? That he, even knowing that he was being recorded, and the proliferation of the access and exposure of what she could do with that data did not deter him. The perfect storm of all those things and the cacophony of the inability to get away from it made you the victim, and the you was everybody. So for the first time, at least in my memory, demographics, socioeconomics, we were all you, and he was staring at you. And for the first time, you could not deny the hate.
Y'all hear me? Don't do me like that, man. I'm leaving. Okay, I told you to leave. I was I am claustrophobic. I'm not working with me. Please. Hold on a minute. No. You take a seat. Hold on a minute. I can't joke. I can't breathe. Please. Fine.
How I saw the moment in 2020 after Mr. Floyd's murder is it was actually almost an explicit acknowledgement of anti-Blackness. It almost felt, right? It's like we are making these commitments because of what we saw happen to a Black person. So it wasn't about DEI actually, and it wasn't even about racial equity or justice. It was to me, it felt very homed in on Blackness, anti-Blackness.
And so for us, I remember at night, kind of my homework at night was, getting together with all of my colleagues that were African American across many organizations, many institutions, and we're all kind of brainstorming and recapping what happened in our organization for the day. And for the first time, we felt like we had the con on calling the shots during a crisis, right? I think corporate leaders recognized that they didn't have the language or the experience or even the diversity amongst their leadership team to call the shots. And for the first time, they started to lean on more junior people that had lived experiences to really help lead the moment. And that's where you saw a lot of task force happening. That's when you saw a lot of, assembly of, CEOs making public commitments around their representation numbers and signing pledges together and saying, we're going to increase women in the workplace by 50% or whatever those goals were.
We saw a major influx of organizations that we have been working with who were coming back to us and new organizations. And in some cases, they had to wait at least 6 months for us to have the opportunity and really the time to work with them because we were literally bursting at the seams with inquiries.
Post George Floyd, everything accelerated. And I know just even for myself, I started to get job inquiries from across the country. And I felt like everyone was looking for a Black woman who understood racial equity. And I noticed that with a lot of my friends as well, that there were these opportunities that they were extremely qualified for, but would never have been considered for.
And I finally felt like it was genuine. I did. I'm not gonna lie. I felt like it was genuine. Not because they had done anything different before, but the voices at the table were different, right? And I did see this shift of power where leaders were listening and people who were oftentimes overlooked or marginalized, but only good enough to be, number two in certain departments, et cetera, were leading these efforts, right?
Some of it, I believe, was genuine, like this emotive realization that things had to change and this willingness to change them. And some of it was performative and optics, that people felt like, oh, this time, we can't not hire a Black person or a brown person to run this. And so that led to a lot of the George Floyd hires.
We saw people who were really interested in the work, who had been doing the work, commit to the work. We saw extraordinary statements being written. We saw billions of dollars that were pledged to working on equity issues. And we saw that for at least a year and a half.
We are creating a Center for Racial Equity, and we committed $100 million over 5 years. We have a lot of diverse officers, but we're not as diverse as we want to be.
Target just announced a multi-billion-dollar investment to support Black-owned businesses that'll make a difference. Target plans to invest $2 billion to get products from more than 500 Black-owned businesses in stores.
What if we gave back even more to the planet than we take? What if we fight for racial justice with equity and inclusion as if it was as essential as the air we breathe?
As diverse as our products and customers, so is our company. At Ford, we not only celebrate diversity, we embrace it because it makes us a better, a stronger, and a more robust company.
Hello and welcome to Community Chats. Inclusion and diversity are important for me as a business leader because they just make business sense. So making sure that you have a workforce that reflects your customer base really drives positive outcomes for business.
And we feel like it's critical for corporate leaders to step in right now and to speak up. And I'm so proud to see so many companies stepping forward, so many CEOs stepping forward and making commitments.
I think this false belief that persists, that it's hard to find those investment opportunities out there. How did you find these organizations? How did you decide who you guys were going to partner with?
You really hit it on the head. This myth that we have a pipeline problem, that there are not incredible Black female entrepreneurs and companies and organizations that are targeting these issues, it's just plain wrong.
This is another moment where it is like, is the progress is there too much progress? Because even though we wanted to feel a little bit better by being a little bit more inclusive, our conditions still are the same.
Equity demands sharing. And America is built up on this idea of a bootstrap mentality, right? That there's this individual, amazing achievement, a meritocracy that we have, and that throughout history, people have gotten everything on merit. But the reality is, America is built on colonization. America is built on rape and pillage. America is built on slavery. And there is so much economic loss. Racial covenants in Chicago, which Lorraine Hansberry shined a light on, cost us $4 billion of wealth in the Black community. Just completely extracted. Never happened. Taken away from us.
But if you think about a household, the most sacred decision you're ever gonna make is, what do you do with your kids? People move all over the country to decide what schools they're gonna put their kids to. People decide a lot of things around the future of their children. Back in slavery days, who watched your kids? Black women, right? So you trusted us with your most prized possession in your children when we had no value, when we could be sold, right? The most important thing in your life, we were the blueprint enough to raise, to instill values in, to teach them how to read, to color with them, to make sure they have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You trusted us to do that as Black women. And you fast forward that to your point to many women's, rights movements, and we make a little progress and a little progress and a little progress. But you also think about the resiliency of a Black woman. We have to be, forgiving, because we understand that when things go bad, it gets worse for us, because from a caste system perspective, we've always been at the bottom, right? We've always been at the bottom of the totem pole.
Fast forward to the 60s and 70s, Black women are actually the backbone of the civil rights movement. So we often talk about Martin Luther King. On the occasion of this Martin Luther King birthday, I took the opportunity to talk about Lorraine Hansberry. Her play, Raisin in the Sun, was a watershed moment because it shined a light on economic segregation in the North while we still battled against Jim Crow in the South. Lorraine Hansberry would inspire Martin Luther King. Before his first I Have a Dream speech, his first iteration of that speech was written on the heels of the premiere of Raisin in the Sun. So he adored Lorraine Hansberry. It would be Ella Jo Baker, who mobilized young people to do sit-ins at lunch counters in the civil rights movement. Her and Dr. King were always at odds because the men were always out front to lead, but it was the women who organized the March on Washington. It would be the women who mobilized people at the lunch counters. Ella Jo Baker, in fact, trained YWCA women. At one point, we had chapters on college campuses. There was a math club, there was a YWCA club, and Ella Jo Baker would train those women, and they would travel down to the South to be a part of the movement. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a watershed moment, not just for Black people and people of color, but for women. Women rolled the coattails of that civil rights movement and that act, and it protected not just Black people, but people of color, people with different abilities, protection against gender discrimination. It protected so many people. So King and all of the civil rights advocates assembled a rainbow coalition, a coalition that advocated for the rights of everyone. But sometimes it feels that there's not full support for that, right? The support weakens. So you're right. That has happened throughout history. And as a Black woman, I've received inconsistent report. There's various reports. Harvard University School of Business, the Kennedy School of Business did a study around Black women in the workplace and what are the obstacles, what are the challenges that they've been facing. One of the obstacles was actually white women not supporting them in roles inside organizations. That's hard to hear, it's hard to say, but it's true.
Right now, I would say white women are voting in their enlightened self-interest, right? So that is why you see like different or greater percentages of them or significant critical masses of them voting on the right versus like what that looked like in support for a candidate like Kamala Harris, where you would think these are the moments where there would be the greatest solidarity because of the broadness of the threats to women overall. But the part of the enlightened self-interest is the interest in the whiteness part of white women, right? And if there is so much of what folks see in terms of what it is that they want to see that's great again, right, that has to do with the whiteness part, then it makes that connection, that solidarity precarious.
I want families to win. I know what my ancestors did. I know what Ella Jo Baker did. I know what Dorothy Height did. I know what Martin Luther King did, Bernard Rustin. We could go through a list of people who fought for the rights that we received in 1964. And today, right now, those things are being threatened.
I want us all in this building to sing, "Go tell it on the mountain," to let my people go. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere.
And all we want to do is to make these people understand that we are human beings and we can work together.
We are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Do you feel that it's wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of his race or color?
Racism was so overwhelming that where I was didn't seem to make that much difference. I was there with the men who were the great leaders in the civil rights movement, the Big Six, although I have to say it was 7 because I was one.
Brothers and sisters in the struggle for human dignity and freedom, I am here to represent the struggle that has gone on for 300 or more years, a struggle to be recognized as citizens in a country in which we were born.
During the 1960s, Black women were pivotal figures in the civil rights movement, but often they were background players and overlooked. History will tell us that Black women have always been there, laying the groundwork, organizing, and speaking out. This was crucial work that led to legislative victories such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. As the 1960s came to a close, the 1970s pushed women's rights into the spotlight. The women's liberation movement was demanding gender justice.
Well, the main demand, of course, is equal rights. Equal rights to have a job, to have respect, to not be viewed as a piece of meat. Equal rights to set forth our own humanity. Equal rights to get into graduate programs, to get into schools, to training programs.
Unfortunately, Black women have not been consistently welcomed into women's rights movements with open arms. Dating back to the women's suffrage movement in the 19th century, this history of exclusion is clear. Many Black women were hesitant to identify as feminists because early feminist movements were largely led by white women who ignored racism. This made room for a movement called Black feminism. Black feminism recognized that Black women faced unique struggles that white feminists didn't acknowledge. From this movement came the National Black Feminist Organization, NBFO, and later the Combahee River Collective.
And the interesting thing about that is that we never expected to get the response that we did. We knew there were black feminists out there, but we'd been so beaten down kind of by the media image of it that we believed, well, if there were black feminists out there, it was probably maybe one in every state at best. And the next day we received over 200 calls from black women around the country saying, where have you been?
Black women have questioned feminism because of our recognition that race is always a factor. So there's been a calling attention to racism within the women's movement, particularly the racism of privileged class women. For example, early on a major thesis of feminism was women need to get out into the workforce. Right. Well, masses of black women were already into the workforce and weren't liberated.
The Combahee River Collective statement boldly declared that their liberation would not come through mainstream feminism or traditional civil rights activism. Instead, they articulated an intersectional approach.
Women of color have transformed the very nature of feminism. And the hallmark of feminism today is what we call intersectionality. To think these ideas together, to think race and class and gender and sexuality not separately, but together.
Black feminists didn't just theorize change, they organized. They built coalitions, led grassroots movements, and created spaces for black women's voices.
For those of us who were imprinted with fear like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive.
Most resistance does not come from the guy on the corner or the guy shooting pool or even the black guy. You know, in the civil rights organization, the person that seems most threatened by the feminist movement is your socially upward mobile, college-educated white man who has so much to lose by everybody getting together.
As we move back to post-2020 world, another movement is underway, a push to collectively hire more diverse workers. But is America ready for this type of change? Next time on The Audit.
Even if you have the best of intentions, believing you want change and experiencing change are two different things.
Because we never actually addressed, right, we just dressed it up.
You know, after sitting in those listening sessions, I knew my experience in corporate America, but it broke my heart to hear others' experiences.
So the number of departments wanting to hire tenure track Black architecture faculty was astronomical. So if we're the only two qualified ones, how can we fill 13 positions?
The big pushback.